Conscious mind. With this structure in mind, view consciousness as a hilltop of perceivable clarity, standing in contrast to a sea of impenetrable cloud that hides further surrounding psychic matter. Understand psychic matter as stretching indefinitely from the center of any particular consciousness and as referring to that which is visible to any particular entity. All consciousness is contained and accounted for within the unbounded sphere of infinite manifestation. At the center of the sphere, the point that represents the entirety of the sphere, there is absolute consciousness. That which is in close proximity to absolute consciousness holds a consciousness that resembles absolute consciousness, such as to bring it into and cause a close proximity. That which is further from absolute consciousness is so as it resembles absolute consciousness less than does that which is closer. To resemble absolute consciousness more or less than another consciousness is to be conscious of more or less of the entirety of consciousness than another consciousness. The hierarchical structure of mind consists of two parts. The first is universal mind, the second is particularized mind. Particularized mind can be broken down infinitely into any specific structured segment of universal mind. This is limited consciousness, particularized consciousness. Particularized consciousness is the conscious awareness of any specified set of psychic matter. It is the aspect of mind that knowingly applies itself one way or another. It stems from the realm of the unconscious and can be broken down into the faculties of imagination and reason. The faculty of imagination is the closer of the two to the unconscious. Through the imagination, the matter of the unconscious presents itself to the conscious mind and becomes conscious matter. Unconscious matter stems from events known to the conscious mind, events unknown to the conscious mind, events within the individual unconscious, and from events of the collective unconscious. Imagination includes all types of dream. All psychic experience that takes place outside of the direct physical experience of the controlling conscious mind falls into imagination. In addition, directed inquiries of the conscious mind can take place within the realm of imagination if they make use of the imaginative faculty as separate from the rational faculty. It is through the imagination that you may gain a conscious awareness of manifestations that are symbolic of unconscious psychic matter. Through imagination you may see what could be and what might have been. Through reason we see how something was done and how something can be done. The imagination offers the reasoning faculty raw material, which the reasoning faculty digests and responds to. In the imagination, ideas spring forth, and through the reasoning faculty we learn how they relate or could be integrated into our current environment. At all levels of consciousness and unconsciousness, interaction exists between entities. The conscious mind exists in an interactive space, constantly coming up against different manifestations, each influencing to the extent and in the way that is relevant to its own situation. Some manifestations in an environment influence a given consciousness more than others. Some will be of different types of comparable strength of influence, according to both their own inherent strength and to the particular receptivity to that energy of others. The conscious mind draws in different influences depending on what it is inclined towards, insofar as the satisfaction of its conscious needs are concerned. The knowledge of the presence of certain psychic content does not offer the same degree of experience as a closer interaction. The mutual awareness of two aspects of manifestation, necessary for a meeting to take place, happens for reasons based largely in what is to the particular manifestations involved unconscious need. The reasoning mind cannot know the extent of the importance of a given interaction to itself, nor can it know when influenced to satisfy the particular needs of unconscious matters, the eventual extent and direction of the change that its conscious awareness will experience. The conscious mind must be careful to give adequate attention to matters that might hold more than is consciously comprehended. The consciousness is supported by the unconscious, and is in many ways subject to the direction of the unconscious, which seeks satisfaction in an array of unconscious needs. The needs of the unconscious can differ drastically from those of the conscious, depending on how close a communication there is between the two. If the conscious and unconscious do not allow for a free communication, then it becomes difficult to access the unconscious, and the seeming needs of the conscious will too far diverge from the deeper needs of the unconscious, unmoored and swept as they would be by exterior influences. The breakdown of free communication happens when, in the unconscious, there resides an awareness of a nature that previously strained the conscious element of the mind. Such awareness arises as knots of hardness, inaccessible without a resurgence of the original experience. The hardness consists of unbalanced and concentrated psychic matter that has been packaged and not fully processed due to the perceived or real inability of the conscious mind to process the matter. When the hardness is punctured by the view of the conscious mind, the matter pours forth like rushing water. As the original experience was one of strain, the arrival of such matter causes weariness. It is the will of the unconscious that all confusion and imbalance be flushed out such that the mind can enjoy a heightened level of awareness. These hardened knots impede the clear awareness of conscious mind. It is due to them that there is broken communication between the deeper, more collective levels of unconsciousness beneath them, and the lesser and more particularized unconsciousness and consciousness above them. At all levels of consciousness and unconsciousness, these hardened knots can be found. All interaction within manifested universal consciousness is designed to bring about a realization of full awareness from particularized awareness. Only through particularized existence can particularized existence achieve universality. Manifestation is thus the embodiment of chaos, yet it exists according to order and design. For anything to take shape, it must be ordered into whatever that shape is, and order and design cannot exist without that which it is ordered according to. Manifestation is a flux of activity. Every aspect is a set of individual consciousness, all working imperfectly, eternally, and in the necessary manner to do the bidding of deeper consciousness. The reasoning faculty of the conscious mind has the job of comprehending what it comes into contact with and controlling the amount of contact it has with any particular force of influence. Due to the imperfect communication between the conscious and unconscious, the reasoning faculty must decide its needs to the extent it can perceive them. If the conscious mind can appreciate that the entirety of consciousness objectively seeks balance and clarity, then it may work with that as guidance. If the conscious mind recognizes a disparity between where it seems to be led and what it understands the true desire of its deep unconscious to be, then it must question and sometimes override the current unconsciously directed course of action. This is in the case the consciousness suspects the direction it is receiving as being an inaccurate representation of the true will of its unconscious. The difficulty the conscious mind faces in such a case is knowing the difference between what is an inaccurate message brought about through miscommunication and what is a direction rooted in an understanding that takes more into account than the consciousness in question, and therefore makes decisions according to a more complex understanding and awareness of logic and circumstance. To avoid this confusion, the conscious mind must think with a mind focused on the need of psychic matter to achieve balance. All conscious design must hold that one need of the general mind as its goal, so as to lessen the possibility of a divergence of conscious and unconscious will. Unconscious mind. Unconscious mind refers to all psychic existence that is, for whatever reason, inaccessible at a given point in time to the individual conscious mind. Unconscious mind stretches from the mists at the borders of individual consciousness to universal consciousness. The unconscious mind can be broken down into further specified levels of unconsciousness. These levels are the individual unconscious, the lesser collective unconscious, the greater collective unconscious, and universal unconscious. Imagine a hill that reaches above cloud. At the top of the hill resides the greatest ability of the mind for reason, and all of what is above cloud is that which is visible to the reasoning mind. From the top of the hill, the reasoning mind can look about and see slopes descending into cloud. As the slopes get closer to the cloud, the clarity for awareness at the top of the hill is lost to a misty awareness where there is a mixture of clarity and cloud. This is where we find imagination. Imagination comes with the first wisps of cloud, and it is with the first wisps of cloud that reason discovers confusion and must come to appreciate that it cannot penetrate the cloud primarily using its own devices. Reason learns that imagination is able to act with greater effectiveness in matters based in this region. Thus, imagination exists in the conscious realm of psychic matter. It is the neighbor both of reason and the unconscious. It is because of the inherent flexibility of imagination that it is suited to act as the interactive element between these two areas of psychic matter. Just as cloud moves, so too is the border between consciousness and unconsciousness unstable. What can be an aspect of consciousness one day can recede into mists, to become an aspect of personal unconscious, only to reappear again in time. Understand this as like to a situation where areas of land become temporarily lost to deep shadow when seen in contrast with the sunlit. Understand the archetypal as that which rises as peaks from the mists, like islands off a coast. Those peaks make partially known to the conscious mind the psychic matter they represent and of which they are a part. With this sight of partially exposed psychic form, the mind can attempt to discern what the form represents, what it is symbolic of, and how it branches into more concrete form to connect to the conscious mind. The archetype is a representation of underlying psychic matter, only partially discernible to the conscious eye. Were the entirety of the archetype to become visible to any given consciousness, then it would no longer hold archetypal value to that entity. Only so long as the entity remains symbolic, or representative of that which remains hidden, can the entity be said to hold archetypal value in regards to another entity. The unconscious is filled with content, all in the process of resolution. Because all of this resolution is an eternal project, all psychic matter is involved and employed. Imagine infinite entities jostling to achieve that which each feels it needs to achieve, and none managing to achieve just what they wish to achieve due to factors outside of their control. Such factors include other jostling entities impeding, the inability to translate imaginative feeling into reasonable action, or an inability to gain deep access to the unconscious through a limited power of imagination and an unbridled power of reason that prevents the growth of the imagination, or that impedes the awareness of the value of imagination. Entities successful at understanding the objective needs of the deeper levels of mind and able to act accordingly with reliable guidance from the rational mind are able to bring about interaction that offers the required influences for the needs of the deeper levels of mind. Universal mind. Imagine all psychic matter. Imagine it spread across a map of infinite dimension and frozen such that it can be viewed particularly or generally. Such is an image of the state of universal mind. It is the image of the psychic universe on the brink of a universal cancellation, that which necessarily occurs with the absolute balance of all matter. It is with this image that we can discern the sheer indefinite extent of potentially definable psychic existence. The image of universal mind is an image of collective consciousness, wherein all mists are dispersed to the extent that the entire scope of psychic existence is apparent, simultaneously perceived and experienced. Stretching from this point of universal mind outwards come manifestations corresponding to infinitesimal degrees of greater particularization and finitude. Psychic existence branches from the point of universal mind, and it is through this branching that psychic energy passes. The chain of communication through the grades of psychic manifestation are as a network of interaction, all influencing to give a groundwork for all other manifestation. It is in this way that the psychic universe avoids collapse. Gravities of consciousness pulling from all different directions hold each other in a perfect metastasis. The universal mind refers to the entire field of psychic matter, including the conscious and unconscious of all manifestation. This state necessarily involves a complexity and depth infinitely greater than that of any given degree of collective unconscious. You must appreciate the existence of this degree of collectivity in order to understand the complexity of your own closely relevant psychic environment. You must also appreciate how this interacts with and affects your unconscious and conscious mind. There are two ways by which universal mind communicates. The first, true and indirect. The second is direct. But be wary of how you approach the understanding necessary to achieve the second. First, universal mind affects the individual imagination through a chain message system. From the very center of consciousness, a message emits. This message is passed on until it arrives at a particular locality of existence where the message is most relevant. Along the way, the message can be misdirected, delayed, poorly relayed, but eventually it must inevitably reach its destination. The further a message is sent, the more it will have strayed from its original intensity and meaning. That which is close to the center is able to read the message of the center more clearly and at a more complex level. By the time the message reaches its goal, it will have been diluted to the point that it is comprehensible as recognizably symbolic of currently incomprehensible complexity. It is due to this method of communication that archetypes emerge from the individual's unconscious into the realms of the conscious as symbolically meaningful but currently incomprehensible beacons. It is imperative that you carefully attend to your imagination and what it entails. Through it, you will receive guidance that refers to a greater need of the balance of general conscious existence. Any guidance you receive in this way will bear relevance not only to your own conscious mind, but also to any consciousness that is in your close proximity. Proximate consciousness is that which is in a position of proximate influential relevance. Second, universal mind affects the individual by direct communication with the faculty of reason, bypassing unconscious matter. It is a trait of reason that it has the potential to gain a degree of knowledge of a direct line of influence from universal mind. However, just as the ability of imagination to discern what lies within the mists is limited, so the ability of the conscious mind for reason is limited. Until the conscious mind has developed a state of existence that appreciates in its scope of reason the intricacies of the entirety of psychic matter, it cannot be able to discern those intricacies. In order for consciousness to achieve a heightened state of full awareness as regards psychic matter, it must make leaps towards universal mind. It is insufficient for reason to carefully and deliberately screen particularized psychic content, as after an eternity of such activity, it would not necessarily be closer to universal mind. It is through the experience of psychic content that the heightening of awareness and clarification of consciousness can occur. Think of the serpent that holds its tail in its mouth. The first way of communication between universal mind and individual reason is the communication of the serpent's head with its tail through the body of the serpent. The second way of communication between universal mind and reason is the direct communication between the head and tail through their contact at the mouth. The second way is often understood falsely. This is the dream of enlightenment, the imagination that all can be bypassed so as to go directly from one state to another without fully experiencing what happens between. So long as communication remains unclear through the body, there cannot be the flexibility required to allow the head to reach the tail. Such inflexibility remains impossible due to the still intact hardened areas of psychic matter that prevent the flexing that would allow the connection to take place where, in the image of the serpent, it transforms into a ring and awareness bypasses the hierarchical passage of intervening existence. You must understand that there are no shortcuts to universal mind. You must understand that any particular manifestation of psychic matter exists as it does for the reason of relevance. That which is close to universal mind is in its position through being close in its nature to universal mind. The conscious mind must therefore increase its view in two directions at once in order to come to know universal mind. It must seek to know universal mind directly through reason, not so as to bypass intervening existence, but so as to comprehend the direction of its experience. It must also seek the gradual clearing of the clouds that hide what of universal mind remains unconscious. Only by doing so may it clear the hardened knots that prevent its direct approach. Existent mind. You must understand what is meant by referring to particularized mind as an existent entity in and of itself. There is an empirical description which in some ways defies reference. The particularized mind necessarily takes into account a collection of constantly changing psychic matter. It is, therefore, complex. Mind is not indefinable as a result of its state of constant change, but we can never know the mind by attempting to make static its changing components. To know the mind as an existent entity, you must view it at the levels relevant to your conscious mind. At those levels, the mind is not just a collection of changing components, but a particular mind. You must always match your view with the level of existence of that with which you are attempting to interact. Otherwise, you will find you interact with something other than that with which you intended to interact. If you view something using a manner of interaction relevant to something else, something that is different enough to require a different understanding, you will encounter confusion. Familiarity comes with interaction, and over time you will begin to see the ways by which the object of your view acts, regardless of whether it falls entirely into your lines of expectation. Note that all psychic matter viewed at once appears as an effervescent mass of activity. Once the conscious viewing mind is focused to the more particularized points inherent in the effervescent mass, form and structure appears that are decipherable to the mind. It is not the case that all of what is unconscious to the individual mind is non-existing or never consciously existing, only that it does not currently exist consciously in the individual in question. All psychic matter exists consciously at the objective level. It is at the subjective level that the designation unconsciousness becomes relevant. In order to have a fully objective view, an entity would have to have absolute consciousness. It is only at the point of absolute mind that pure objectivity exists, and at this level psychic matter does not exist at all in its particularized form. At the subjective level, there is enough of relevance that your perception may contemplate entire environments. These environments are not to the exclusion of all else, but require and give and receive constant interaction with what is just beyond the temporally existing and spatially limited given consciousness of the perceiving entity. At any given passing moment, there is a certain amount of psychic matter coming and going, into and out of what was at another moment the realm of the unconscious. It is suggestive of the limitation of conscious mind that a perceiving entity can only see so far from its current position and not further. It is not suggestive of what actually exists and in what diverse ways. As representations of finitely existing mind, perceiving entities are aware of a relevant landscape, but cannot see the full picture of what they are connected to. To fully increase your perceptive ability, you must view not only with the sophistication of advanced rational thought, but also with the view of the primitive mind. The experience of the primitive mind is more in tune with the full psychic experience of its immediate surroundings. This view comprehends its surroundings as parts of itself. It understands unconsciously itself and its surroundings as an extension of further existence, deeper unconscious existence. The manifestation that exists within the environment of the primitive mind exists as manifestations of psychic energy that symbolize and epitomize that of which the primitive mind is comprised. This is the nature not just of primitive mind, but of the existence of consciousness attuned to the practice of attending itself closely to those areas of itself still steeped largely in mist. The consciousness in this way sees all manifestation within its interactive environment as being representative of aspects of closely related unconsciousness. The reason for this arrangement of particular manifestation in the environment is that entities that are similar in psychic value shall necessarily be manifested similarly, as they shall have comparable needs in terms of evolutionary growth, and entities that are placed in influential proximity to one another are so due to the inherent relevance of each to the other. Psychic matter is manifested a certain way according to design. All particular consciousness exists through a need-based determination to evolve consciously towards the absolute value of consciousness, universal mind. From the deepest levels of the psychic existence that is particular to any given entity comes a directive that passes through all levels of energy specific to that entity, particularly those levels of energy closely relevant to the design of manifestation at the level of mind and physicality. All manifested entities are involved in particular mental and physical surroundings that signify by mirror any given entity's manifested existence. Within that environment, the manifested entity shall find influence more or less particularly relevant to itself. It is at the level of reasoning mind that determinations are made concerning the relative relevance of and interest in various potential influences. Consciously, the mind must evaluate what is more or less relevant to itself and direct action according to the need-based directives of the various aspects of its existence. This is, ideally, as objective a process as possible, in that the directive of change at this most fundamental level acts in accordance with the desire for a heightening of psychic value. If the mind of an entity loses focus of this directive and allows the balance of influence to shift from the need-based directives of the deeper collective aspects of its unconscious, and instead focuses on the want-based aspects of the more superficial levels of its conscious existence, then that which will be brought into its surroundings will be more applicable to those want-based aspects and less applicable, and thus less strengthening of its ties to deeper collective aspects of mind. Influence. Within the scope of existence, any manifested form is made up of infinite manifested form and is a point of major influence over anything that is a part of it. The manifested form itself is a part of a greater manifested form. Thus, any given manifested existence acts as a link in a conical chainmail-like network of infinite dimension. Think of this conical network as a mountain standing alone, and note that the dispersion of influence happens from the point at the top and then cascades down the sides like water. The surface area increases as the mountain broadens. The amount of water that will cover the entire surface at the top of the mountain will have become mere rivulets by the time it reaches the broader slopes towards the bottom. It is like this that lines of influence pass through the infinite links that cover the surface of the mountain. In terms of influencing entities, any entity that represents to another entity something more concentrated in terms of psychic matter, but less concentrated in terms of particularization, is archetypal, so long as it remains in a position to speak of something else that is unconscious to the entity in question. Understand that there are an infinite quantity of archetypes at varying levels of psychic complexity and varying degrees of collectivity. The nature of the positively influencing archetype is that it takes on a position that is part divine, in that it seems to the viewing entity incredible, and part not divine, in that it is close enough in its manifestation as to be relatable to the viewing entity. The influencing archetype must exist in a way that is beyond what a given entity is familiar with. It must be somehow better, whether that be stronger, braver, or brighter, or with greater intelligence or wisdom. The viewing entity is then put in a position where it can admire the influencing archetype as being a superior form from which it might learn. The traits of the archetype must be within the scope of perception of the viewer, or they are irrelevant. The viewer must be able to experience a sense of closeness to the archetype, such that it does not feel alienated by the archetype. With alienation can come dismissal. While the viewer must feel closeness and a relatedness, he must also feel inadequate by contrast. If the archetype is too strong, the viewer might feel he is so far from what he sees that he will never be like to it, and need not attempt to bring about changes in himself inspired by the archetype. If the archetype is too close to the viewer can relativize the position of the archetype and disregard the archetype's superior aspects. In such a case, the viewer will concentrate more on the ways in which he and the archetype hold similarity, and find ways to discredit what he sees in the archetype through concentrating on aspects of the archetype that are irrelevant to the real reason the archetype has appeared. The viewer thereby distracts himself from concentrating on the weakness in himself, as described by the comparison of the archetype's strengths and the corresponding aspects of himself. In summary, the manifestation of archetypal properties must be far enough away that it may not be discarded as something lesser than it is, but not so far away so as to become practically invisible. Within any given existence there is that which impresses and that which does not. You must keep focused on that which impresses, or you will stagnate. In this way you must steep yourself in competitive spirit, but this spirit must be focused on yourself, and on that which is the greatest that you can comprehend. Compete with your sense of inability by applying your ability. While you are here, in this second phase of your education, you will explore activities with which you are now unfamiliar. You will comprehend what you are capable of and what you will become capable of. In your masters, you will find your archetypes. You will find yourselves in awe of their abilities, but you will quickly learn. Those who will come after you will be in awe of your abilities, and those of their masters. Within these walls, for any given weakness of any given student, the student will find an archetype that will guide the student to remove that weakness through strengthening. When you are old students, the young students will look to you in this way, and to all in between. You will always look to your masters. When you have completed your 12 years here, those who enter will be less able to comprehend the difference between you and your masters than those who will arrive next year. When you leave here, you will be amongst yourselves, but you will be in the world of man, where you will find no inspiration. You will be by your nature as shrouded demigods in that world. Your archetypes will no longer reside in the form of your masters, but from within you and from within nature herself. You will be trained to ascertain the archetypes within you and within nature. You will comprehend an archetype for each aspect of the manifestation over which you have influence, and you shall compete with your inability by applying your ability to achieve each of those archetypes in turn. Through reasoning and imagination, you will see that which is unknown in the locally manifested sense, and strive for it. In this way, you take as your teacher an imagined embodiment. So long as you are learning and improving, it does not matter whether your teacher stands before you or in your mind. And if it is the case that the teacher residing in your mind is able to teach you more than the teacher before you, then you are wise to seek instruction from that source.